you do believe that if one person takes the lead, there is light at the end of the tunnel for this.
Yeah, for sure. There's some very popular coaches and people in this space, and like that was their marketing angle. And I was like, I don't know, because my experience had been different. My wife and I had always done personal development seminars together. The importance and the definition of leadership is the management of energy. And so if the management of your own energy becomes your focus, then as a man, your wife can't help but respond to you differently if you show up differently. As a man, and I just believe like leader of the household, stewardship of the family, if you start to show up differently, if you focus on different things, if you take better care of your health, if you fix your own mood and attitude and whatever you got going on, and then you show up to serve your family, like your wife and kids can't help but respond to you differently.
Welcome to Unreasonable Autonomy. My name is Sarah Grace. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs and innovators who refuse to settle. Here we dive deep into raw, real conversations with boundary pushers who have pursued seemingly impossible ideas and yet have achieved unreasonable results, whether that's in their faith, relationships, health, politics, yes, even business. All of those conversations are happening right here, right now. So let's buckle up, because this isn't about playing it safe. Unreasonable ideas, unstoppable results. Let's go. I could not be more excited to welcome my dear friend Tanner Wendell to the podcast today. Tanner Wendell is the founder of Family OS, a personal operating system that helps men lead their marriages and families to match the success they've had in their career. With a background in tech, sales, and leadership coaching, Tanner blends his professional experience with the lessons of overcoming his own family challenges to help men fully own their role as the family leader. So thrilled to be talking to Tanner. Let's go. All right. Welcome back to the podcast, you guys. I am sitting across from a dear friend of mine today, and I am so excited. We have the amazing Tanner Wendell with us today. Hi, Tanner.
Hi.
So glad you're here. And I did something that I normally don't do, and that is the fact I told Tanner the very first question I was going to ask him, because I felt like it was kind of mean. So I thought, since we're friends and I want to be friends after this, I better prepare you for the road that we're going to go down. So everybody listening, whether you're on YouTube, you're on the podcast, you've already heard his bio. And just in 30 seconds, how I know Tanner. Tanner and I have been in some masterminds together. We have sat in the same, environment in Denver and learn and grow. And we've had business successes together. We've had business failures together. And somehow we are still living and breathing to tell the tale. Would you agree, Tanner?
Yes, for sure.
For sure. Really, I want to dive straight in with you, because they're not here to hear from me. They're here to learn from you. So since you are in the world of relationships, particularly with men, right out of the gate, what do you wish women knew about men?
It's such a good question. And even though you told me, I was like, wow, I wasn't prepared for that. But in the 30 seconds that I've had to think about it, I'm gonna go straight to what I think is at the fundamental core, which is there's this perception, right, that like around sex. Let's just talk about it, right? And a lot of my clients and guys that I deal with and just being in this world, they might call it intimacy or connection or whatever, but nonetheless, it is a fundamental piece of human nature. And for me, I grew up, didn't really, with a lot of mixed information about it. And so what I attempt to get my clients to see, as well as their wives, to answer your question, right, for the women listening, which is, if you study Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is our psychological needs, sex is at the base of that pyramid, along with like food, water, and safety. So it is a fundamental need, which is why sex sells in advertising. Sex is used in all these other things. Pornhub gets more views than Google, right? So there's all these things that we look at from a society and we're like, sex is bad and it's taboo and it's this and all my husband wants is sex. But it's a fundamental part of like human nature that I just think we don't really understand well as a society. And then it gets really muddy and causes a lot of marital problems.
Well, I love the idea that it's the foundation of needs. And I would argue to say that culturally, women feel like it is at the foundation of men's needs.
Yeah, for sure.
Factual, true, false, go.
I don't know. Well, so here's how I see it, which is women are driven differently before kids and after kids. Fair enough, right? Whereas prior to kids, women also, again, depending on your upbringing and sort of programming, but there is an element of women that like they want or enjoy sex as well, right? Generally, right? For most women. And so what happens though is because we're driven to reproduce, right? And if we take this back from a biblical standpoint, be fruitful and multiply, right? So it's this area where it's like we are driven to reproduce. So it is a core, I wouldn't say just a men's need, a core human need. But what happens is very quickly we kind of forget about that. All the luster wears off in marriage after kids come, and a woman's hormones orient to, rather than having a kid, taking care of the kid. And the man never changes course, right? The man is still, I'm here to procreate and reproduce, which is why there are people in culture and even in, this industry and in this world that would advocate for having, multiple wives or open relationships or whatever, based on this basis that men are here to reproduce, to sow a seed, and they can do that with multiple women while providing. And, if you read kings and biblical stories, like this stuff happened, right? So there's this argument for that. That's not my argument. I'm just saying I've come to understand that argument and how that happened historically. Right. But for a woman, the needs literally hormonally change. Like your body, you probably know this. I don't, but my wife, like your baby cries, like you feel it. Right. When you're a mother, your child gets hurt. A mother feels that emotionally and physically different than a father. And so I think it's at the core of our human needs, but psychologically and kind of mentally, that need or the view of that need shifts after children enter the picture.
So it's kind of cruel. That's kind of a cruel irony, right? To put two people into a marriage and say, figure this out. So what is to be done? Is all hope lost?
So I think here's a couple of the big things that I do my best to help men understand that I had to understand for myself, which is one, first off, just fundamentally understanding that, right? Understanding how that works, our psychological needs, the changes of female versus male, kind of the stages also of raising children. I mean, I'm finally kind of getting out of that stage, but it's like my two youngest are 5 and 7. And like, if you reel back the clock 2 or 3 years ago, like a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, like there's a period of time where that's just really tough for anybody going through it. Yeah. And so the problem becomes men just taking care of their own needs, right? Again, we can look to, Pornhub statistics, anywhere you look at, and so this is like a fundamental question that's kind of uncomfortable. I've become comfortable talking about it, but when I ask men, in a conversation, when we're considering working together about masturbation, porn, not sure you've ever talked about this on your podcast, but here we go. Right? Which is fundamentally taking care of your own needs. It's just kind of acceptable. Like, oh, why would I even ask that question? And I'm like, well, here's the challenge, which is if you are doing that, then you really have no desire for your wife. And so you stop doing the things that you would have done early on in the relationship that would cause her to be attracted to you. Right. So it seems like, wow, is all hope lost in this, a marriage? And I used to buy it. Like I literally had a story that you got married, you had kids, you had a good job, and like pretty much it was all downhill from there. Right. And I created that. I mean, I was a dad, a husband, and an ex-husband before I was age 30. So I had like created what I thought the reality of like marriage and relationship was. And then I realized like, no, we actually just have to go back to the things that we did before kids entered the picture and before we gained a little bit of weight and before we got sort of jaded about things and before we just normalized like mediocrity and disconnect in the relationship. And so it's actually not that hard, but I'm a proponent that like men have to lead that change and that initiative in their relationship.
Mhm. Well, and I think that's a very attractive approach because it really takes two to tango,
For
right?
sure.
Figuratively, literally, all of those things. And that's often one of the big stumbling blocks in any kind of marriage, disagreement or need for changes. Well, I've got this partner and he's not on board, or, those kinds of things. So you do believe that if one person takes the lead, there is light at the end of the tunnel for this.
Yeah, for sure. And I used to not necessarily, even just a few years ago, right? There's some very popular, just coaches and people in this space, and like that was their marketing angle. And I was like, I don't know, because my experience had been different. My wife and I had always done personal development seminars together, and we met. She was 40. I had already been married and divorced, so we kind of had a lot of life underneath our feet, we'll say, and we met through personal development and common interest. And so originally I was like, oh no, this is the way. What I've come to learn for myself, but also for my clients is, so I talk about leadership. The importance and the definition of leadership is the management of energy. And so if the management of your own energy becomes your focus, then as a man, your wife can't help but respond to you differently if you show up differently. Right. And so if as a man, and I just believe like leader of the household, stewardship of the family, if you start to show up differently, if you focus on different things, if you take better care of your health, if you fix your own mood and attitude and whatever you got going on, and then you show up to serve your family, like your wife and kids can't help but respond to you differently. So that's really my argument when guys feel kind of hopeless, is like, yeah, but I don't know, but she's this, but she's that. I'm like, listen, one way or the other, your wife is going to have to respond to you differently because you're choosing to show up differently. What she does with that, we're not in control of. 9 times out of 10, she chooses to follow you, and she's just been waiting for this version of you to come alive.
Oh, and you get to see the miracle happen.
For sure.
Really for a row. And I think it's important for our listeners to know, like, I am fully aware of what you do and the topics you cover and those things. And you really are a rare breed in the sense of, I would not invite most coaches of men on this podcast because the approach is so crass and aggressive and vulgar, and that seems to be the call on how do I get men to respond and like do this thing. And as a female, I'm like, barf, like I don't even want to approach it. But you have somehow found this way of staying, I would use the word whole, maybe that's offensive to some people, but whole, and you don't feel like you have to do the big flex and vulgarity and like all this kind of stuff. Like, why has that worked for you?
I mean, I literally, like, I've got chills as you say that. Like, it's so fascinating because for a period of time, I felt like I was missing something because I wasn't that. Right. And listen, there's some of those guys that are my mentors, some of those guys that I've learned from. So I'm grateful for, standing on the shoulders of giants per se. But and worked inside of, one of those organizations for a period of time. And so what I've come to realize, though, is that approach doesn't work for everybody. And even though I was able to like get value out of it, it's not my natural state. And so, you know what I'm saying? And quite frankly, like if you get underneath of it, oftentimes, I'm not singling any one person out, but oftentimes there are still kind of some unresolved traumas, childhood stuff, some things that really drive this like aggression, which ultimately attract like other guys with the same kind of wounds. And so I think the other thing for me is like, I spent a decade therapy and retreats and this and that and the other thing, like really healing, I don't know, as much as I could find of kind of that internal childhood stuff, and becoming more fascinated with the psychology and like attraction and relationships and leadership and kind of more that perspective of it than like come on, be a man.
Yes. Yes. Right. And I'm like, that is a dime a dozen in the
Yeah.
relationship stage of those who are trying to help men. So you talked about the impact of trauma, particularly as a child, and how that can impact future marriages and behaviors around sex and mentalities. What are some of the more common childhood traumas that we may not be aware of that men do experience? Because boys will be boys, right? And like talk to me through that. Maybe you'll plug in your own story here.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things. One is, if we, again, back to just sort of like psychology and research, like the first personal development seminar I got into at right when I was going through my divorce, and I can back more into that, but I'll just kind of start there, which is I'd never been to personal development, never read a book on it. I was, 28. I was just coming out of a divorce, and a friend invited me to just come to basically it was basically like a webinar in person, right? It was like an in-person pitch for this personal development seminar. What I didn't realize, and this is kind of a dovetail, is she was attempting to hook me up with a girl that was selling that seminar. And so it was like a way for us to meet in a common area. Anyway, it was kind of a crazy story. All of it to say, I'm super thankful because I sat through that presentation and I heard these statistics, which was basically between ages 0 to 4. As humans, this isn't a male thing. This, again, is a human thing. Ages 0 to 4, we learn 50% about who we are, how the world works, our thoughts, behaviors, habits, patterns, right? So most of our learning or half of our learning and orientation about the world around us happens before most of us can even form sentences, right? And so no matter how great of like a childhood or an upbringing you had, because I think this is where people hear trauma and they're like, no, I had a great childhood. I'll use my wife, for example. Her parents live with us. They'll celebrate 58 years of marriage this year. They're great. They're a super awesome model of family. But even us doing our own work, we've dug through things from her past that some she didn't even remember, and others just didn't seem that obvious, that were like causing problems 40 years later. And it was like not even with her parents. It was like stuff with neighborhood kids and, being bullied in school. So the point is, like, we all go through things in our childhood that shape us because we are just this open box trying to figure out like how to navigate this world. Right. So 0 to 4, 50%, 5 to 8 is another like 30%. So by the time you're like 8, 9, before you're even a teenager, you're basically like 80% of who you are and what you think about the world. And you have kids, right? It'd be fair to say, like, you see personalities develop by the time they're 5. You see kids in like junior high that are acting certain ways. It's like, man, where'd that come from?
Right.
And the challenge is for most of us as parents, if you remember those early years, especially with your first kid, like, you don't know what you're doing the first few years.
God. I still don't know what I'm doing. Oh my word.
Right. So when you hear that and go, wow, okay, then it's less about the trauma, right? But I think the thing, I will say this, the thing that shocked me the most being in one of the men's movements and groups that I have been, is the amount of little boys that go through some sort of sexual abuse. I had no idea. Statistics are like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. Like, it's insane. Just the sheer number and the statistics around it once you kind of like peel back the curtain. And again, that's where, like, I was in an environment where that was a commonality. And so it came out a lot, right? And it attracted those type of guys. And I was like, man, I have no idea. And the amount of like shame and guilt and skewed perceptions men have about sex, just all of these things that get formed at such a young age.
Wow. Okay. Big breath for a hot second. So
take a breath.
how do you wake up every morning as a dad and be like, my kids are going to survive this world? Like, how do you not let it do that to you?
I know it's so interesting because especially I find like older people in my family, my mom or my in-laws or whatever, people have this perception of like, oh, especially the world now, right? The world we're living in, I can't imagine raising kids. And I think for me, my oldest daughter, who's 14, I was 24. I didn't want to be a dad. I wasn't planning on being a dad, but I was obviously participating in the activities that made me a dad. Yeah. And so her mom and I were on the rocks, like even when she came into this world, right? So it was a bumpy few years knowing these statistics, and then we split and got divorced when she was like 4. So her entire kind of 80% was through this very challenging time. And so I'm like, wow, knowing these statistics, that's really concerning. What I've come to realize, though, is that one, like when we're able to just understand this stuff and say, hey, listen, we all have stuff. Like we all have stuff. And to me, my view on parenting is a couple of things, which is I believe God has given me my children to steward. I don't believe they're mine. I don't believe that my personal worth and value and a reflection on me, like, my 4-year-old or my 5-year-old, fell out of the second story roof on Saturday. He's okay, but he fell out of the second story window in his sister's room on Saturday. And then he pulled his pants down at circle time yesterday in pre-K. And so it
is what it is.
It is what it is, right? And so to me, I believe in like stewardship and leadership. I believe, like I hear people say, and my kids will say this, life's not fair. This isn't fair. And I'm like, no. I believe life is fair. It treats us all the same way, which means we all have our own challenges, right? And so when I've been able to kind of just equalize this and understand, like, I'm here for stewardship. None of us are going to get out alive. My kids aren't going to make it out without some of their own bumps and bruises. I kind of joke with people that, everybody, or not everybody, most people focus on saving for their kids' college fund when they should probably put aside as much money for their kids' therapy fund, right? Like,
Amen.
Just the fact that no matter how good of a parent you are, there are going to be things that your kids are going to stumble into when they become adults and they really start to like spread their wings out of the house, that they're going to say, man, I really wish my parents didn't do this, or this thing happened, or that we may have no idea about. So I'm like totally open to that. We've also, I would say one other thing real quick is, I think one of the things that's been helpful is I've never been afraid to like get the resources that my kids need and view that. And I think part of that was going through a divorce. Like my oldest daughter had a therapist very early on. Right. And it was just 4 or 5 years old. And it was just kind of a necessary intermediary because her mom and I had different opinions about what she thought. And we're just like, hey, we need her to be able to go to somebody, to talk to somebody. And quite frankly, somebody to have a voice for her back to us that's not her. So I've never and I grew up thinking therapists were quacks, you're broken, all these things about getting help.
Yep.
And so I was kind of like, I feel like I was forced into that. I feel like a lot of this stuff, like, I don't know, God had a design and purpose that I didn't understand for a decade, but was like kind of just thrust me into it to be like, no, there's resources, get your family help. And so whether that's my oldest daughter, we just, my 7-year-old just went through an intensive like day-long test around her learning style. And I was given the label of ADHD a couple years ago because of some of her behaviors that she was exhibiting. Right. And so it's like, well, she's exhibiting these behaviors. It comes from somewhere. It's like, oh, okay. Right. Which originally with other people being diagnosed with ADHD, I'm like, hey, it's no problem. It's like, I think it's a superpower. But then when that label was ascribed to me, I was kind of like I had to kind of deal with that for 6 months. And then I was like, okay, no problem. But the point is, like, I've never been afraid or have prioritized the resources to just get whatever help we need. And if you look at like my son's really into soccer, so he does a lot of things with soccer, but it's like how much money we spend on him with soccer. Well, why wouldn't we spend the same money if he needed a therapist or he needed a learning specialist or he needed a whatever to like help them get through the things that clearly I'm not skilled at or know how to navigate.
Oh, and I love how you really point out there are certain things for your kids that really are necessities. And one of those is resources for their particular dynamics and challenges, and that there shouldn't be fear associated with that. And it really helps me bring it home when you said, I believe that God has kind of put these kids on loan to me, right?
Yep.
Like I am here to try and take care of them. They are his. And I notice in a lot of religious circles that there is a deep intensity behind a mother feeling responsible for every choice her child makes. And we do this funny thing of like, oh my gosh, they are a Sterling scholar and they get a scholarship and they do all the things. And the mom says, oh, she just came that way. Right.
Right.
But then the minute that the kid steals something or pulls his pants down at whatever thing that they're at, learning circles, it's all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, it's all my fault. Right. And what is the middle ground there on I am confident as a parent, I am steady as a parent, and I am going to be a parent versus going through the volatility of daily choices of kids from age, my youngest is 5, my oldest is 15, same age as yours.
Yeah, same as mine. Yeah, and I would say I think this is probably another gender thing in general, right? Like I hate generalities, but there are certain things just gender wise you
would know. Yes.
Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? There's a reason that book was written. So my wife's very much the same, and she would tell you like I have helped her and continue to help her with this idea of stewardship, right? And not taking every little thing so personally. And so I think the things that have helped for us is, and not only just with kind of behavior or kind of stewardship, but in a lot of ways of the idea of having a family vision. Our therapist introduced this concept that we've sort of adopted and evolved, like a family constitution, where we talk about, hey, here's what we stand for, here's our values, here's the things that really matter to us. And so kindness is one of those things. And especially with my 5-year-old son and his 7-year-old sister, I mean, they can go from, laughing and giggling to like pulling each other's hair and scratching each other's face. And we're like, hey, rather than like, you're bad or why did you do that? Or some of the things that even for us, we still kind of have to break the immediate reaction, which is, hey, are you exhibiting kindness? Like, how could you show kindness to your sister? And so by establishing like some of those things that are important to us, then we're able to use those with the kids and like how we talk to them about things. And then something we've implemented like more recently is like little gold coins and basically like rewarding them in sort of a visual way for exhibiting those behaviors or for going above and beyond. And so, I don't know, there's different opinions on that. We've gone back and forth on it. It's not like it's an allowance, but it's like, hey, here's a reminder that when you do the things that are in alignment with us, or you go above and beyond, or you help your sister or your brother or whatever, like there's a reward for it. Right.
Wow. Yes. And I'm dying over the commonality. So you're like my 3rd podcast interview in about a week, which is pretty normal for me. But all 3 of my past guests are super high achievers. They're crushing it in their businesses and their marriages. Yeah. And all of them are actively in therapy. I'm like sitting here saying, we have like a club here. Like, is it possible that is really a new frame that we can bring to the new generation, that this is not only normal and not scary, but like necessary? Like,
so what's interesting is my wife had our therapy appointment at 1. We had a miscommunication on I was like, I'm not going to join right before this. So the point is we have like a standing monthly appointment.
Incredible.
And here's the challenge that I see, which is that, there's platforms like BetterHelp, right? That have, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I only know based on just kind of clients that I've gotten. And of course you hear more about the negative than the positive, but the idea there is it's almost like the Uber of like therapists, right? Which is like, I just pay a monthly fee. I can get some help, but you're not really like following some sort of structure or system or have somebody that gets to know you. And so it's just kind of like an hour to, listen and troubleshoot things. And so I do take a little bit of an angle against the therapy industry in general, just because I believe I just think it's kind of an antiquated model, right? And I think it's heavily regulated. Nothing against women, but it is 75% female. So as a man, like one of my best performing ads on Instagram, I say, hey, the therapy industry is 75% female. If you're a man going through troubles in your marriage, the last thing you want to do is go sit on a couch with a woman that feels like your mother-in-law and your wife. And that seems to resonate with guys, right? So
advertising, I love it.
So my perspective on this, though, is that I don't think it's really any different than business, which I think we can relate to, which is I think it's important to have some external influence that you trust speaking into that area of your life. So whether that's a therapist that you find that you can trust, whether that's coach, whether that's community of other couples, like I think there's multiple avenues to do it. My wife and I have, and like, I mean, literally our therapist, she's told us we've done probably 200 hours over the course of 6 years. 98% of those sessions have been both of us together. So things that are painful for us to discuss about our own individual lives together. She's like, I've never had a clients, one, work with me together in almost every session, and two, stay this long. Like she literally every month, she's like, you still want to keep paying me? And we're like, yes, just because I'm running a business. We got 3 kids. My in-laws live with us. Like my thing is our life is very dynamic, that every month something is happening. And some months, you know what? We pay her $175 an hour just to talk to her about how great things are going and reminisce about a time not so long ago when things weren't going so great and kind of celebrate our wins. Like it's not always deep, oh my goodness, we have something to work on, but we know that she's on the calendar and we're going to have a place to go and kind of bring things up if we need to.
Oh, incredible. I think there's a principle in that. And in fact, you and I are friends because we both invested in a coach to up-level the business, right?
Yeah.
Like it just is a habit and a structure of high performers. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
I want to take back a little bit. You clearly are really devoted to what you do. Like you are so devoted, so much that you would call out all the female therapists with your ads, right? Where did this come from? Like you have so many skills, you could have gone a million different directions. Why this? What happened?
Yeah. I mean, kind of like many people, my pain, right? So one of the things that I realized of like unpacking my own story, and one of my taglines I use is I come from a family with an 82% divorce rate over the last 3 generations. So my parents divorced when I was 13. All my aunts and uncles on both sides, mom and dad's side, all divorced. My cousins, my sister, like anybody sort of in my generation, either, children out of wedlock or relationships that didn't stay together. I have 2 cousins that are now married, but one went through divorce. The other kind of had a tattered history, right? So it's and the only people that really stayed together were my grandparents on both sides.
Wow.
And that's primarily due to a function that they just came from a era where people just divorce wasn't that common. Mm-hmm. Right. So even though they stayed together, I had to look at it and go, well, yeah, but that wasn't really an example of a relationship that I would necessarily want. Nothing against them. I love them. They're my grandparents, but it's just not something that, that I would want. Right. It was just kind of this idea of just like tolerance. Right. And quite frankly, the more that I started learning about this, I'm like, well, obviously something about both of my sets of grandparents' formula wasn't very effective if all their children got divorced.
Right.
Right. So we hear, divorce 50%, whatever, much higher in my family. Right. So the likelihood that I got divorced was like nearly 100%, which I did. Like I told you, I became a dad when I wasn't necessarily looking to become a dad at 24. And then we really didn't get along for a year, somehow thought marriage was going to make that better, got married when I was 25. We were together for a couple years. We were living in Kansas City at the time, moved out here to Colorado. And then ultimately we spent a year out here, which I think was one of the things we had in common. Like, hey, we both wanted to be in Colorado. We got out here, and that year was kind of miserable. And there's some things that came out, and just ultimately we ended up splitting. And so to me, like I said, like what was the most painful became one of these things where it set me down this path of this personal development journey. Not to mention what I didn't say. So my parents divorced when I was 13.
What an age.
Yeah. And so my sister had just graduated high school. So she was in college. My dad basically left, moved a couple hours away. And so I made a decision at that point to basically cut him off. Right. I'm the man of the house now. I'm 13. I know what's going on. And I could count on one hand, probably talked to him maybe 5 times in 15 years from age 13 to 28.
Wow.
And so it wasn't until I went through my own divorce and started getting into personal development, and, God works in God ways. Like I started thinking about him more. He started contacting me more. I went through a really powerful exercise about forgiveness. Two things that have been huge for me are responsibility and forgiveness. Simple terms, something that I think most people just miss. So responsibility and forgiveness, I made the choice to forgive him and like rebuild a relationship with him. And what I realized was, oh, wow, there's two sides to every story, or maybe three. Right. And I started to see how he was driven by his childhood upbringing and then my mom, and kind of how that combination came together and clearly why it didn't work, but they didn't do anything to like work on it. Right. So a lot of it's just out of my own pain, my own curiosity, from the marketing world, it's like health, wealth, or relationships, right? Like what industry are you in? I got into a network marketing company as part of my kind of divorce journey. I was getting healthy. I was, it was beach body, right? I was doing at-home workouts. I was slinging shakes. So I was in the health industry. And then I realized, well, in order to grow a network marketing business, like some people have focus on the product. Other people are like, focus on the business. So I'm like, if I really want to grow this thing, I got to focus on the business. So I went from health and I'm like, money, sell money. And then that's actually part of like my wife and I met during that time. And then when we really step back and we're like, what are we passionate about even early on in our marriage is like relationships. But I had a false belief in my mind that like, I couldn't make a lot of money or I couldn't like have the lifestyle I wanted or replace my income by being in like the relationship guy.
Right.
And so I just I attempted kind of everything else and just kept coming back to like, no, dude,
what I want to do.
This is the thing. So yeah.
So I love that. And I have like 4 million questions for you.
Okay.
Tell me first just the most recent thing that you said about, I had this fear that I actually wouldn't be able to make money doing this, right? You are not the only person to say that. Like relationships, you can't do tangible results. You can't like track progress. You can't do all those things. Like get into marketing business mode with us for a minute. For those listening and are like, I want to do what Tanner does, but like, he's the only one doing it that's making money. Like that's a very real thing. How have you framed that?
Yeah.
Show the value of what you do.
Yep. So a couple of things. One is I've had this belief like a long time ago, even though it took me a while to adopt it for my business, which is like, if there is somebody else doing it, you can do it too. Right. And so for me, when I was at like my lowest points, and not in good shape, it's like I would see people with like no legs, running a marathon, right, with fake, like these inspirational like things that it's like, man, if they can do it, what is my excuse? And so that was part of it, which is like, are there people making money? Yes. The other thing for me was, okay, is there a clear need? Well, based on divorce statistics and just talking to men, not even from a business perspective, I'm like, yeah, clearly there's a need here.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing for me and what's been the process for me of this, I like narrowing down, like, well, what's your message to the marketplace? Right. And I think that's, and quite frankly, I've tested multiple, and I've in the process this month of developing something specifically for dads with ADHD, because I realized that's a commonality amongst a lot of my clients that I wasn't even marketing necessarily that way, but it's like your vibe attracts your tribe and who you are. Right. And so I hired help. I got an outside perspective, and I gave him some information about my clients and some things. And he like narrowed in on this ADHD thing and was like, man, I think there's something here. And I'm like, yeah, I feel it too. So part of it has just been continuing to just test, like, what's the right message to the marketplace? And because quite frankly, like once you get into marketing, like I've had to come to believe that like, if this is what God has put me on this earth for, then it's my responsibility to get good at marketing and to get good at communication and get good at getting people's attention. And people are 3 to 4 times more likely to move based on pain than they are pleasure. And so as much as I'd love to focus on, hey, have a great marriage, as much as people are like, I like that idea, they just don't really pull their wallets out for that. And so finding like a painful problem and being willing to almost induce the pain a little bit, like kind of remind the guys of the pain they're in service of actually helping them get out of pain.
Ooh, and let's dive more into the pain.
Yeah.
Because often in the relationships, whether you're working with groups of people or one-on-one, the pain in every marriage is so different, right? Or the evidences of that pain, like how do you market with that?
Kind of, but at the core, so what I've realized, and again, back to like the sex topic, there are people that specifically like that's their angle. And so I've like tried that on a little bit, and I'm like, I'm not really that guy. And even guys that responded to that message, they're like, hey, it'd be great if, yeah, I'd love to be more connected with my wife and it'd be great to have more sex. I just want to be respected. And so I realized that there is this thing for men about being like respected and listened to. And when you are not the leader of your house, when your wife views you as another child, these are very common. Like one of my messages is like, hey, has your wife ever referred to you as another child? And at some point in my marriage, and like my wife has said that to me too. And so these are things that guys are like, oh man, he gets me. Right. So part of it is me living it. Part of it is me listening to my guys and kind of finding the commonalities, and then just being willing to speak specifically to the pain, and then be able to show that like, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. Because the other thing is we all kind of just normalize our situation. And having like a crappy marriage and being overweight are two things, especially men, have just kind of normalized. Yeah, but most people are, yeah, but I don't really, nobody has a great marriage. Yeah, most people are overweight. Yeah, and I'm like, no. So like being able to create kind of contrast and stand firm in the fact that like that's your belief, but that's not 100% of reality on earth. And if you have a desire to have something else, which most guys do, they just don't believe they can or know how to, then the fact that you have that thought and that desire and that interest means that that's truly what you want, and there's a way to get there.
Ooh, what role does weight play in a marriage?
Do you mean like physical weight?
Physical weight.
I think
you brought it up 3 times.
Yeah, no, I think
in their bodies.
I think it's huge for sure. And quite frankly, for me, it's probably because it's a personal journey I'm on. Like I was a chubby kid, and then I got like in pretty good shape in high school playing football. But what I realized, and then I got in like really good shape when I got divorced, because I was, back on the market going into my 30s.
Yeah.
But then I got married, and then I fell into this pattern of like, and dads will say dad bod. Dad's put on the weight as the mom does with the pregnancy. And there's all these excuses about it. And like, I was at a men's event at a church here locally, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago. And just like, I was just disgusted walking around seeing like 90% of the dudes with just like a paunch over the belt. And I'm like, there's 1,500 guys here. These are Christian men. They're here for, Jesus, and we want to be better leaders, but like 95% of these guys are carrying an extra 20 to 30 pounds. And so for me, I've come to believe now, if you're like 300-400 pounds and you're like, I have a cousin who was like 400 pounds, and he had some health issues, and he lost 100 pounds pretty quickly. Right. But when you're carrying like 200 extra pounds, it's not that hard to lose like 100 pretty quickly. Right. So you hear these stories. There's obvious cases where it's like this is obvious. But when you're like 20 to 30 pounds overweight, it's like easy to stay that way and kind of hard to get motivated to get it, to do something different.
Yeah.
And as you get older, I mean, I've realized this, like your testosterone drops off, your metabolism, your hormones change, all of these things happen. And so from a physical attraction perspective, if you don't feel confident looking yourself in the mirror, like it doesn't really matter what your wife thinks. Like if you don't like what you see in the mirror, you're going to come across, like you're just going to put out an energy that is unattractive because you feel unattractive.
Ooh, and like you said, they feel like another child. They don't feel listened to. They don't feel respected. And the reality is they feel out of control. They feel like they need to be mothered. They feel unattractive because of what's going on in their body. Is that what you've observed?
Yeah. Like basically I've come to just believe that we have a lot, I don't know the percentage, any percentage would be made up. Let's just say 90% of men in their 30s are walking around like 13-year-old boys in a bigger body, playing games, looking at porn, smoking weed, eating too much food, like not taking care of themselves. And it's like, yeah, cool. That was stuff that we did back then and we felt cool. And part of this, this is a great like segue into it. Like part of the issue is that like, if you ask most American Christian, Western men, what does it mean to be a man, to how we started the episode, right? Like you've got a group of guys online that are like, you got to be jacked, shirt off, tattoos, certain cars, sleeping with multiple women, whatever, right? Or you have to be extremely vulgar. Like there's a persona that's been put out there of what it means to be a man. When we were growing up as kids in the, whatever, 70s, 80s, 90s, I don't know, there was a different persona of like cowboys and, I was just thinking about this like a couple weeks ago that like some of the like I used to listen to country music because I grew up in Nebraska, but even some of the songs that I used to listen to that were like programming me as like what it meant to be a man, of like, I'm a hard working man, right? I work with my hands, I ride horses. And so it's like, I don't do any of that stuff. Like I grew up in Nebraska in the country, but I got a computer when I was 10. My parents were like, yo, technology is the way. I wanted to get out of my town of 1,200 people as soon as I could. Yeah. And so I joke that it's like most of my clients are soft hands. Like you have soft hands if you work with a computer or you work in financial service. Like you're soft hands. You're not turning wrenches. You're not fixing toilets. You're not laying bricks. And so a lot of these guys are like, I don't even know what my identity is as a man. And so they're stuck in this like 13-year-old body where they're like trying to get away with stuff and sort of like cope with their emotions, which again, alcohol, pills, porn, food, sugar, food, all of those things that are basically destroying their health. And then they wake up and they look in the mirror and they're like, I don't like what I see. I wish my wife would have more sex with me. And it's like, dude, not like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, you're not even attracted to yourself. Like, how would anybody else be?
Do you feel like that is a hard sell for you, or do they sit with you and just nod and say, yep, let's go, Tanner? Like,
what do you mean? Like, is that a hard sell?
Like, do they see themselves that way? Like, do they understand why their marriage isn't what they want based upon their physicality and how they're showing up? Like, is it hard for you to help them see that?
Not really. Like most guys actually know that like it's kind of just like a pinprick, right? It's just like somebody else outside of them being like, come on, dude, like seriously. And they're like, yeah, I know. The problem is it's like being in our mastermind together, right? Like birds of a feather flock together. And so the challenge is you find your beer drinking buddies who have mediocre marriages or whatever. And like, everybody's just kind of in it together.
Yes.
And I mean, I have a client who like he was already in pretty good shape. There's kind of two categories of guys, which is guys that have let their bodies go. They make decent money, things like the bills are taken care of, but they've let their body go. And along with that, kind of like everything else has just gone downhill. And they've really sort of even stopped like trying to initiate sex with their wife. If that's an area that just doesn't come easy, they're just like, nah, I'll just take care of it. Right. So there's those guys. And then there's another group of guys who, again, like they make good money and they've gotten in shape, or they were an athlete or whatever. And so they're in pretty good physical shape, but their wife still isn't attracted to them. And they're frustrated there because they're like, physically, I look good. But the challenge is that sort of like athletic, go, driven in the office thing is still really kind of running them at home. They're kind of a tyrant at home. And they don't realize they haven't actually like taken the time to, date their wife or think about what she needs or really tap into their children's needs. It's just all sort of authoritative, and they don't realize why that's not attractive either. Those guys can actually be a little bit harder because it's like, listen, dude, I know this works over here, or it has at least to get you to a certain level of success, but it's not working here. And usually those guys have like, it's a thing where when you're successful in one area, like when you're successful in business and you look good, financially you look good, your body looks good, you feel very poorly about yourself when things aren't going good at home, but you work really hard to cover it up from the outside. And that leads, again, addiction with alcohol and pills and all these other things. So there's kind of two camps of guys where, depending on what's going on, it's not that challenging once they're willing to admit the pain. And that's kind of back to the marketing where I'm like, you have to show the contrast, because guys have gotten really good at just covering it up and justifying it. But if I can have an honest conversation with you and kind of get to the pain, then it's like, okay, like, let's go, let's work on this.
Ooh, and you bring up so much about these men's desire to, like, I want to lead, and like, I'm already providing, I'm paying the bills, and some of these guys are in shape and like doing all these things. And it makes me think of the phrase of gender roles. And I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, believer in God, you're a believer in God. And there is a lot of gender roles dictated in Christian culture. That my church has like a full-blown document, a proclamation on what the man's role is, the woman's role is, right? And like, someone's going to turn off the podcast, you're going to be so offended, right?
Yeah.
What is your modern day approach to gender roles in a home? What is the best way?
Yeah. So I do believe, again, just from my own experience, that like, so there's masculine, I approach it from like masculine and feminine energy, right? Okay. Which we have both, and God is all of it, which is where we came from. Again, my belief. So we have both. When you understand one, again, if my definition of leadership, which is management of energy, and then you understand that masculine energy is a little bit just more structured, right? There's a reason we have these sort of societal things. For sure. Right? It's structured. The feminine is a little bit more flowy, creative. And so both of those are inside of us. It's a matter of understanding what are your strengths and what actually works for you and your family. Right. Like, so I don't take a hard nose of like, you got to be doing that, right? Like this has to be, but if you're out of balance, what I see in a lot of, for instance, one of my clients from last year, his wife is a doctor and he was staying at home homeschooling the kids. And we got on the call and he came in under the sort of marketing about like sex life. Yeah. And was like, okay, cool. This isn't happening. The challenge is it wasn't necessarily just about the fact that like, oh, she's going to work and he's staying at home. What we discovered was he had built such a case around the reason his kids needed to be homeschooled and why he needed to do it and all this other stuff. But then he was like, I hate it. Like, they're driving me nuts. Wow. This isn't so like once we were able to kind of peel back the layers and that was like last summer. So by school year of 24, his parents live like right down the street from him and his mom homeschooled them and she loves it. And so he started having his mom homeschool his kids. And then he started doing things with like woodworking and other stuff that he actually enjoys. And so it's not about like you got to be doing this and she's got to be doing that. It's more about like, what's actually in alignment for you and what works for both of you. Right. And then understanding the difference between masculine and feminine. Here is a challenge, right? If you're a woman and you're in your masculine energy all day long, and again, see this with like high performers, you need a man generally. Everybody's their own, but my experience, like the man has to sort of match that masculine energy for you to feel like, okay, I can be the woman in the relationship. Yes. It's very much the experience in so my wife was 40 when we met. She lived in New York City. She was a DJ on Sirius XM on 2 hard rock channels. So male dominated industry, big city energy. She had been, treated poorly by multiple men that she had dated in the industry, outside of the industry, was to the point where she was about to just kind of like give up on the whole idea of like marriage and kids and the dynamic that she had wanted like basically all her life. Right. And so it took and she was devout Catholic. She'd go to church like daily mass, like sometimes, church 4 or 5 days a week. So spiritually, she was way stronger than me. And she's 10 years older than me. Right.
What a
So
story.
like all of these things where I came into the relationship and it's like we started as friends. We was very unexpecting that like we would, she was in New York, I was here in Colorado, or 10 years difference. Like I was like, oh, I used to listen to you on the radio, but I'm not really as angry, so I don't listen to as much hard rock music anymore. It's like kind of a joke, but seriously, like I was just in a very different place. I'm mountains, she's city. Like the whole theme at our wedding, we had like a mountain theme and a city girl, like the whole thing. Like we're very, very, very different people. And when I wanted to break up with her because I was afraid of like commitment and getting married again, we basically were forced to sit down and say, hey, what matters to you? What's important to you? What are your non-negotiables? Like we don't have time to play the dating game. So let's get down to business about like what actually matters in a relationship to figure out whether we should break up or try to make this thing work. Right. And I think most people that get married never are kind of forced to do that, right? We right. like each other and we, whatever, and we got together for whatever reasons and we avoided a bunch of red flags and we got to this point. And so one of the things, if that is very muddy and not clear, that I work with my guys on are like what are the non-negotiables in the relationship? And like, let's get to the heart of what mattered. And for us, it was communication. She had been in relationships where, things were thrown, holes were punched in walls, like not nice things happened. I had been in relationships where I yelled, I said things, I acted in ways I didn't want to. And we're like, listen, nonviolent communication. We can disagree, but we're not going to do these things that we both had experienced in past relationships. Non-negotiable, right? Faith was one of those things. She was a devout Catholic. I couldn't even say the word God. I was going to a church, but it was a Science of Mind by this guy, Ernest Holmes. It was very pivotal for me even coming to the idea of God. And I feel like God led me out of that church into Christianity, like sitting in a church service being like, wait a minute, there's more to the story than just love and light. And Jesus is the great, master teacher, but he's not the savior. So there's like all of these things that we were so different on that, 8 years later, like we couldn't be more aligned on, but it took us getting like really clear on like what really matters, right? I think a lot of people, we agree on politics, or we like the same music, or we disagree about that, or she'd like to go to the beach and I'd like to go here. It's like, that's all surface level stuff.
Right.
We still have different preferences on vacations, types of food, how we approach things, music, but like none of that really matters because we're like clear on the foundational things. So we kind of took a detour from gender roles to non-negotiables, but to me, non-negotiables and like core kind of fundamentals are more important than like who does the dishes, who does the laundry, who does that stuff. I'm a better cook than her. I grew up raised by my mother, my grandmother, my sister's a chef. Like I grew up cooking. She didn't really grow up with that skill set. And I have no problem cooking, just sheerly as a function of like our schedules and me running a business and her doing things more at home and helping with her parents. Like I had to teach her how to cook.
Right.
And and it caused some friction early on. And then she's just like, how do you make this? What about this? And now it's like most meals she cooks, it tastes just like I cooked it. And I have no issue with it. And she has no issue with it. And we just had a lady come over to the house this week that we're thinking about hiring to help us with laundry and some of the things that like are a burden for her that I don't think she should be doing and I'm not going to do. And so we can pay somebody $30 an hour to do our laundry, right? So there's just like things like that of like, and I kind of come back to this idea of like an operating system, like family operating system, like what works for you and your family. And if you don't define it for yourself, you're just taking from how you grew up or somebody else's like narrative and opinion.
Well, my mind is actually kind of blown when we talked about gender roles and you immediately were like, yeah, we can talk about gender roles, vacuuming and laundry and like who works and who brings in the money, whatever. But you immediately transferred over to this feminine energy, masculine energy, which I am really fascinated by, specifically when you said, look, if you've got a woman that is operating at a masculine energy at this kind of level, if you look at the yin and the yang, you would actually think that the balance to that would be a man who is more submissive or who is more to balance that. And you're actually declaring the opposite. You're saying if she functions here, he needs to bring his same masculinity. And you know what's fascinating? That is my marriage.
Interesting.
Right? Because I run a business, right? I do all these things. I've got a lot of masculine energy. I can show up in a room. I can sell. I can do all the things. I'm present online. My husband's a physician, right? Yeah. You can't sit there and show up in an OR and be passive and not direct and all those kinds of things. And I've always thought, why doesn't that tank us? Like, why doesn't that create just too much like high achiever or whatever it may be? But diagnose my marriage there, Tanner.
Awesome. I knew you worked online. I didn't know what your husband did. So I was like, I hope I don't offend you. I'm just going to say it the way that I see it. Here's the thing though. Your husband as a physician, there's a different demeanor. Like I couldn't be a doctor. I'm too archaic. I'm too like out there, but there's a different demeanor, right, to a doctor that I'm sure was a match. So there's these things where it's like the yin and the yang, we do match. And so that's why I go to the energy, because you can be in your masculine and business and doing this but what I've seen is that, like I said, the man in his own way doesn't mean he's got to be like, well, you're helping people run webinars, so I got to go kill an elk to be more masculine, right? It's not these like traditional things. And I think that's why I didn't understand it. I think a lot of people don't understand it, but like truly, and the thing is, it's not actually that hard when we just get back to, I think what I said early on of like, when you focus on yourself, you take care of yourself, you become the best version of yourself. It's like those natural qualities actually just come out. And a lot of guys are like, yeah, my wife's too X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, you're not going to drag her down, right? It's like most guys are like, if only I could drag my wife down so that I would look superior. And it's like, that's not going to happen. If you have a successful woman, a career woman, whatever, right? Somebody like you, there's no like, oh, Sarah, please lower yourself and put yourself in a smaller box so I don't feel threatened. It's like, no, mister, like you need to develop yourself and expand. And what I found is that like most women aren't looking for they're not looking for some Greek god that's 8% body fat that like drives a Ferrari. Like most women would be happy with like, hey, are you like 15% body fat? Like you do something where it's not even about money. It's more about like in your purpose, right? It's like, are you in your purpose? Are you purposeful with your time? Are you doing things like for yourself, for the family, versus like, are you overweight and you're just kind of a drain on me and the kids and you just like you're here, but you're just kind of here. So it's more about that than money or traditional gender roles or whatever. I have no problem taking out the trash. I mean, I do my market research and I see stuff. Sometimes I get sucked down the Reddit rabbit hole, and it's like things I see in the Reddit, like marriage thing and the reasons people get upset and divorced and argue over taking the trash. And I work 12 hours a day as a man and you're a stay-at-home mom, so all these things should be taken care of. It's just like, okay, I mean, I guess if you want to be unhappy and divorced, like you can kind of buy into that narrative, or you can just figure out what actually works for you and your spouse and do that instead.
Oh my word. I mean, it's blowing my mind in so many ways, just the way that you articulate it, and that the way that you invite people to just say, okay, are you going to fight about the trash, or are you going to have an awesome marriage? Like, what you going to do? Like, practice that choice, practice that agency. Really, really fascinating in all the things that you do and the personal challenges that you face and the ways that you've tried to help these men. What do you wish men knew about women?
Oh, there we go. The reverse of the question. So I had this experience like at the end of last year when my wife and I were like, we were doing our annual planning. We had a getaway, like three days or so, which I just find, side note, I just find like for us, we plan those quarterly now, where it's like just us to get away for a couple of days. And I know guys are like, oh, it costs a lot of money and coordinate the babysitter, blah, blah, blah. Okay, just get over that, right? Because if you truly want to get kind of in your true essence, both as a man and a woman, and just experience each other, to me, that's been more fruitful than like, we got to go on a date and go to dinner or go do something date night every week. Like that did not yield the results that like getting away and taking 2 to 3 day weekend, sometimes a 4-day weekend, like for our annual planning, has yielded for us. So anyway, we were in that planning, forget exactly what we were doing. And I saw my wife. I actually took a picture and I was just like, I have this where I was just like, my wife is this beautiful vessel of feminine energy, right? And, or just energy in general, right? Kind of back to the energy. And, you know, again, the Bible talks about a weaker vessel and that can get all distorted of like, oh, the woman is weaker or whatever.
Sure.
But the message for men and the way that I saw that is like, she chose you for a reason. Like she chose you for a reason. She trusted you at some point. She is like this delicate vessel, this beautiful flower. And much like a flower, when watered and properly cared for, will blossom and bloom and just be beautiful. And I can't take credit for this. There's a pastor, Jürgen Matestis, who runs this amazing church out of San Diego, Awaken Church. And I go to their men's event every year. And he talks about your wife as a product of your husbandry. If you look up the term husbandry is basically to care for. Like you can go to college for an animal husbandry degree, which is like a degree on how to care for animals. There's no wifery or whatever the other word of that would be, right? But husbandry is this word that is basically the way of caring for something. Right. And so to me, I think a lot of guys look at their wife as like a way, back to the sex thing, a way for their needs to get met, somebody to cook their meals. Most of them are treating their wives kind of like an extension of their mother. Clean, do my laundry, take care of me, take care of the kids, do my meals, and have sex with me. And, you know, that's kind of as far as they think. And there's just so much more available when you can just view your wife as just like vessel, beautiful flower that will blossom and bloom when you actually show it care. And it actually takes less effort than you think.
Facts.
Right? It truly is the little things. And I think most men, myself included, we make it out to be these grandiose things, but you would be surprised what a thoughtful, intentional, kind text message or sticky note on the mirror or just even verbally saying it on a regular basis will do. Yeah. But I so many couples get this kind of invisible wall that comes up in their marriage. And then they're like, I don't even know where to start. Everything's a fight. And then they just shut down. Yeah. And then it feels like pushing this massive boulder up a hill to even figure out where to begin.
Yes.
But once you can get that boulder kind of moved and get momentum, like the maintenance of it is actually not that hard.
Oh, and it makes me think of a discussion I had with Greg just yesterday when we were observing, it was not a Reddit thread, but something similar about a woman who was just so mad. You probably love stories like this.
Yeah.
Who was just saying, if he touches my butt one more time, when he passes me, I am going to scream. Right. Yeah. And she just was talking about every time he passes me, all this kind of stuff. And I just was so sad.
Yeah.
I just was so sad. And I read it to Greg and he was like, why do you think she's saying that? You know, and it brings back what you were saying, where if we go back to kind of this, and I'm not even saying gender roles, I'm saying like caveman archaic approach, where it's like food, you know, babies, sex, like I will provide. And that's all that you're going to build out of this partnership of this person that chose you for a reason. I loved when you said that. I wrote it down. Mm-hmm. If that's all you're going to get, then is you're going to get a very caveman-like life, right? Yep. Instead of this exceptional thing. And I just thought about that so much of, you know, I'm sure she's battling because she feels like that's the only kind of attention she gets from him is, you know, him smacking her butt and all that kind of stuff. But it just brings a real sadness to me.
I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Oh, just go.
Can I share? One, when you like the caveman idea, we like our therapist taught us just a long time ago, which is whenever you're confused about something or you're like, how should this whatever kind of operate, she's like, think back to simpler times. Think back to when survival was the goal. And this is with raising kids. This is with male female dynamics, because the thing is, we do live in, I mean, for me reading, like when I read the Bible and people are like, oh, wow, we're living in some certain times that are different, that seem to be different or more danger or whatever, that I'm like, have you read the Bible? Cause like, to me, this is just kind of humanity on repeat, just with a different, it's like playing a video game. It's just kind of like, hey, we just entered a different level with a different skin, but it's pretty much the same thing as it's always been. We just as humans believe that like we're living through the worst time, and we're living in a time when all of the information is available to us from everywhere. So we know everything, and our brains were not designed to like take in this amount of input. So a couple of things, which is one, getting back to kind of like, hey, if survival, or like I mentioned earlier, core values, non-negotiables, like let's get back to those things, because that will help us kind of solve the problem and get and rationalize in our brain without all of this external kind of noise.
Wow.
That to me is like one thing. The other thing is, we're living in a time, and especially I've become like super passionate about this with everything that's happening with AI, and the fact that like, if you live in America, even if you're homeless in America, you are in like the top 2-3%, maybe 5% if you're homeless, of people in terms of like access to resources, money, wealth, et cetera. Top 5% in the world. Wow. Right. So the majority of our world lives on like $2 a day, like far less than even the poorest people in America do. So if you live in America or any civilized society, to put that into perspective, yes, we work to earn money and a paycheck, but by and large, like most of us aren't really fearing for like where our next meal is coming from. Right. We may get the occasional, the Costco's out of this, or the eggs are out because there's a shortage of eggs, or the toilet, you know, like we have these kind of blips when people like freak out, but it's like, no, what would you really do if like you weren't able to eat again until an animal was killed, or until the crops were harvested? Like, what would you really do? Right. So most of us aren't actually concerned with most survival needs.
Survival. Yeah.
And with AI, you know, there's this idea of universal basic income, because there's not going to be enough jobs for people. And like, what are people going to do? And so to me, I actually believe like we're living through a time that is not so dissimilar than we read about in the Bible, where it's like we are meant to go serve each other and be of purpose and like do things that are serving each other with our unique talents and gifts. But the last 125 years or so of the Industrial Revolution and the information age has oriented us to believe that our role is to go to work for a certain amount of time to earn money, to pay our bills, to get survival. And like a lot of that is kind of becoming like irrelevant. And so as it relates to marriage, like the goal isn't just survival anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's like the goal is that you are supposed to use your marriage as a vehicle and a vessel to create something together. And if you're confused and you think that your role is like caveman days, like I think that's why there's a lot of just conflict, because people are kind of confused at where we're at in the historical timeline, and they're trying to go back to like very rudimentary stuff when we're living through a time that's much more advanced than that.
Tanner part 2, right? That is a whole discussion, my friend.
I know. I'm like, wait a minute. I feel like I just opened another discussion here at the end of this.
Hey, everybody vote with a rating or review. Tanner again. Yes, please. I mean, really, you opened up a huge topic that we do need to.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. The thing that I actually wanted to say real quick, and then I'll let you land the plane here, is I've come up with in my mind to the context of the lady, you know, with her husband touching her butt, like a very quick litmus test as a man for your marriage, which is you walk into the kitchen and your wife's been over emptying the dishwasher. Like, what's the thought that crosses your mind?
You're not going to make me answer this.
I'm not going to make you answer this. It's just become my litmus test, because it's like you walk in and you look, and it's like, I mean, I see my wife, you know, been over unloading the dishwasher, and this just came from a real situation. And I'm like, ooh, I'm going to go touch her. I'm going to be flirtatious. You know, like I'm going to turn this into a moment. Other guys are like, ugh, disgusted. Other guys would be like, wow, I wish I could approach her, but I like, there's such this distance. So it's like, to me, it's become a very quick litmus test, like just for my own, that tells me a lot about your marriage.
Wow. I have never heard that in all the marriage stuff I've dove into. I love it.
I hadn't either. And I hadn't really talked about it much, but I'm like, it's such a good, quick litmus test of like, hey, what do you think? You walk in, your wife's unloading the dishwasher. What do you think? What do you do?
Wow. And can I just present some hope to those listening where
Yes.
many times you may just be listening here and you're like, we've got our own stuff and you guys don't understand or whatever. And I guess what I would bring to the table, and I don't want to speak for you, so you can correct me, is that marriages that are exceptional, they do not just happen, that they are absolutely fought for, right?
Yep.
I was raised by the most exceptional of humans, even. And I was raised to understand God. And I was raised by a mother that knew who she was and had confidence. I grew up with parents that sat on each other's laps and were flirtatious. Like, I grew up in the golden age, and I've had to fight deeply to have the connection that I have and to actually love it when my butt gets smacked in the kitchen regularly. Like, right? Like, and I don't mean to be like silly about it, but like, it is absolutely fought for. And I look at your story of becoming a dad, quote unquote, too early. And I don't mean it that way, but becoming dad
unexpectedly.
In a marriage, and you've got in-laws upstairs and you've got, your business up and down and so many things. Like, it is something that will not just fall into place. That it absolutely takes effort. What would
your body, your marriage, your business, like there's certain things that just are not given. And we'll talk more in part 2 of, but I've been thinking just industrial revolution, right? In society, we're just kind of, hey, I show up, I go to work, I get a paycheck, I got to retire, like certain things where we've just become expectant. And so I think and oftentimes people will talk about the younger generation is entitled, and it's like, well, where did that come from? It came from somewhere. The kids didn't just wake up entitled; they were programmed that way. And so the things that like really matter, that like are like the fruits of life, actually take labor. And I think when you like recognize that, then you can fall in love with the labor and enjoy the fruits rather than like be disgruntled that there's no fruit on your tree because you've been like chilling your heels. And the last thing on that I'll say is, my wife said this very recently. She's like, I always looked at my parent, probably similar to you, right? Very, Christian household, different religions, but very similar concept. I always viewed my parents as kind of this like gold standard of marriage. But what I didn't realize was I viewed their marriage of 20 years or 25 or 30 years when I was old enough to think about marriage and really look at it. I viewed that as the model of marriage. So when we weren't that in the first 2 to 3 years of our marriage, she thought, what am I doing wrong?
What have I done?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. And so for most of us, back to the 0 to 4, like a lot of what we think and believe gets formed before we even have language and before our parents really know what they're doing. And then we get a mental picture of the way things should be some time further on in life. And then we feel like we're failing because it's not that way immediately. So I 100% like agree with you. And as complex as I should make it sound so I can market and sell my services of marriage to people, like, there are some very basic, fundamental, common things that when you can scrape away all your special stories about your life and your situation and just understand the foundational pieces, you can actually start to choose. And I use that word intentionally. Like, you can choose to build the type of marriage that you would like to have for the rest of your life.
And that is a masterclass. That is an absolute masterclass, and hopeful that we can create what we are really deeply yearning for. Tanner, I am so grateful. Like, this is such a win just for me here in the room to hear of your wisdom and your hope for what is really, really possible and what you fought for. In traditional podcast fashion, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you.
Okay, let's do it. I'll keep it to rapid fire answers.
You're great. What is a book that every person should read?
What is a book? Think and Grow Rich. I think it's just one of those things that takes it from the frame of money, but talks about the importance of like how we create our reality in our mind.
Ooh, love it. What podcast and or soundtrack is in your ear the most?
Interesting. So I find myself, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I used to listen to a ton. I actually listen to either worship music or I'm into like these like binaural beats and like productivity, just like background music that have been really helpful for me to just like kind of focus and plug in. So I feel a little out of sorts when people like talk about songs and ask, I'm like, I don't really know. I kind of just listen to the same worship music, or I listen to like just like ADHD binaural beats sort of audio tracks.
That is fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating. I will take it. And very last question, well, second to last question is, what is something on your bucket list that you have not yet checked off?
Ooh, bucket list that I haven't checked off. I would say more world travel. Like I don't have a specific area in mind. I feel like more islandy type of stuff. One of the things that my wife and I talked about, like she loves the beach and just being able to travel. Australia kind of sticks out to mind. But I want to see more of the world. I know people are like, hey, America is great. I don't believe it. I believe it. I don't need to live anywhere else, but just like to see more of this beautiful land.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So last question is, as you look and imagine yourself at the end of your life and you think about your kids and you think about your wife, what do you hope you are most known for?
Yeah. So from a parenting perspective, I parent in a way where I want my kids to spend time with me when they have the choice, right? i.e. when they're adults. So I want them to feel like, hey, he was there. He supported us. He understood us, even though we didn't always agree. Like we have a good relationship. And I want my wife to feel like her life continues to get better by choosing to be in relationship with me.
Oh my gosh, what an answer. Yeah, no pressure to everybody else trying to answer that question. Tanner schooled you all. I love
Another one that I hadn't really thought about, but I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the basis for me.
I love it. Well, a huge thank you to you, Tanner, for sharing your wisdom and your light and spending your time with us. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Unreasonable Autonomy podcast. If you loved this episode, my guests and I would love to hear about it. Go to the show notes to reach out and let me know what resonated with you or what topics or guests you want to hear in the future. I am here to create for you. Look, I deeply admire your commitment to pushing boundaries and going after an unreasonable life. Keep dreaming big, taking bold steps, and expecting the unreasonable. For more, go to the show notes to dive deeper into the conversations that will keep you going. Thanks for being here.